Chapter 26 What Happened to the Trust? Ice spread. Without stopping or hesitation, Mu Bai yelled this in a rush, demonstrating all of his hard work. His pupils changed. After he finished his magic activation, those watching suddenly realized there was a layer of frost spreading on the body of the puppet. The ice quickly covered its body, and the puppet now looked as though it was painted in a layer of ice lacquer. It was rather astonishing. The stabbingly cold air pervaded the entire exam grounds. Creak. The ice spread didn't stop after it covered the entire puppet. It even began to spread onto the floor of the exam grounds. The other classes also had ice element students who had taken the activation exam. Clearly, their ice spreads weren't as imposing as Mu Bai's. The other students felt intimidated and took a step back, feeling like the ice was about to spread to where they stood. The directors and examiners were calm. However, their eyes flashed with praise. This was the equivalent of a proficient ice element skill. It had reached the standard of a member of the Magic Association. This was actually set up for older students by the Magic Association. A student who only awakened a year ago, capable of utilizing the ice element skill to a proficient level, was something extremely rare to come across. Not bad. Mu Joyan still gave the same evaluation. Mu Bai didn't know whether he had entered Mu Joyan's eyes. With his heart feeling nervous, he shifted his gaze toward Mu Ningzhu. As he looked at her, Mu Bai felt as though an arrow had pierced through his heart. It was because his most beloved Mu Ningzhu hadn't taken a look at him from the start. Instead, her gaze had always been attentively watching a certain person in his class. Mu Bai took this opportunity and looked for the person she was looking at, and he felt another arrow piercing his heart. Mo Fan. She's looking at Mo Fan. Scoundrel, scoundrel. Why is she looking at him again? What is there to look at in a guy who is almost covered in trash? Why aren't you looking at my remarkable display of skill? Mu Bai's nervous face was almost completely distorted. On the most important event of his life, all he wished for was to get Mu Ningzhu's attention. But in the end, she still ended up looking toward that little hooligan. That little hooligan was only a clown that existed to entertain the princess. What's there to see in a clown? When you're done laughing, move on. Why are you still wasting your precious attention on him? I will make you suffer immensely. Mu Bai's face was exceedingly gloomy. He carried a heavy resentment as he left the exam grounds. Your marks are extremely outstanding. Your Stardust is S, and your activation is of B grade. The examiner gave him his final results. Even the top students would only receive a C grade or a D grade on the activation test. The only other person who had received a B was that lightning element user, Xu Jiaoting. With a grade like this, he deserved the title of the #1 in school. Next, Mo Fan. As people were admiring Mu Bai magnificently seizing the crown, it was finally Mo Fan's turn. The truth is, Mo Fan felt like something was strange. Why did it have to be me after that green tea man? Did they scheme this? Mo Fan refused to believe that there was such a coincidental thing in this world. However, it didn't matter. If one needed sleep, one should sleep. Different situations called for different measures. If you don't do anything, then there'll be no clear sky. Are you all right? He whispered as he watched Mu Bai walking over. I did what you told me to. Mu Bai seemed like a scheming woman as he replied sinisterly. I'm doing this for the good of Mo Jiaxing. By directly sweeping his son out of here, I'll save him the trouble as a parent tirelessly worrying about him. His son wasn't someone who was suited to study magic from the beginning, yet, he still had to force his way in, he said. He and Mu Bai naturally had ways to deal with Mo Fan. Before the examination, he had used his powers as the school director to carefully scheme something. The bald examiner was one of He's people. Thus, the order of the examinees was something he had arranged. As soon as Mu Bai finished his exams, it became Mo Fan's turn. After Mo Fan finished his examination, it would be the time for resting and announcement of grades. Thus, within this short break, one could secretly pull a trick. For example, when Mu Bai had placed his hand on the star appraisal stone, he could slip in a black stone into it. The effects of the black stone were very simple. When the star appraisal stone was emitting its radiance, the black stone was capable of absorbing a part of the energy, causing the star appraisal stone's radiance to dim by a lot. So if Mo Fan was barely able to reach the C grade, then this tiny black stone the size of a grain could lower Mo Fan's grades to a solid D. Either way, he's just trash. Who cares if we make him look like complete and utter trash? There really was no need for the school to waste its resources on a person like that. Expelling him from the school benefited not only the school but also his family. Mu Bai had already smiled so much that his face seemed completely distorted. "How are you, Mo Fan? Going to avoid losing all of your face this time?" Mo Fan, that sounds familiar. At this time, Mu Joyan slowly opened his mouth. "Big brother, he is the son of Madam's driver, Mu," he reminded Mu Joyan. At that moment, the Mu Joyan whose eyes that seemed like ice and snow this entire time suddenly began to turn. In truth, he had already taken notice of Mo Fan. It's just he was in doubt. How come the second he got here, it was Mu Bai's and Mo Fan's examinations? Mu Joyan took a glance at Mu Ningzhu to his side. Mu Ningzhu quickly recovered her tranquil manner, acting as though she was looking at the mediocre students from before, without any fluctuation to her emotions. Mu Joyan's eyes gave rise to some satisfaction. A kid will always have a time where they are rebellious. Once they grow up, they will no longer be that childish. Let's watch then. He also counts as one of our Mu family, at least, he was. Mu Joyan's manner of speaking was indifferent as he said this. Mu Joyan was also very clear on the fact that a driver's son was incapable of being any good. Thus, letting Mu Ningzhu watch was also beneficial. This kind of person was common within the small Bo city. They would leave our world sooner or later. Mu Joyan didn't want this kid, Mo Fan, to remain a scar within the heart of his precious daughter. On the other side, Mo Fan didn't listen to what these people were talking about. He had already walked to the front of the star appraisal stone, and just like the people before him, he placed his hand on the star appraisal stone. To be honest, I'm really thankful that he is here. He can save me from setting the standards lower. This way, I won't be too miserable, a failure of a student said. "Third brother, I also got a D. Don't worry, we can leave the campus together in a natural manner," said his classmate, Xiao Bing, who was a water element from the same dorm. Whether he can receive a D is hard to say. Yeah, he probably didn't make any progress on his cultivation. In the same class, Joman, who also possessed the fire element, was attentively watching Mo Fan. She wanted to know whether he studied or not. A person who clearly had a higher talent in the fire element than her, being expelled from the school, this made even Joman feel it was somewhat a pity. At the same time, she couldn't help but loathe Mo Fan, a person who didn't put effort into improving himself. There's light coming. The radiance seems really weak. It feels like it's even weaker than AD grade. On the star appraisal stone, the radiance felt extremely bashful. It was simply unable to escape from the inside of the star appraisal stone. However, the radiance on the inside had a relatively strong light. It seemed as if the light was being concealed by a shadow, simply unable to escape from the inside. Shit, something isn't right. That light, it doesn't seem to be AD. Really? Grade C? The dorm mate, Xiao Bing, looked at it in astonishment. He seemed unable to believe that Mo Fan was actually able to cause a C-grade fire element radiance to appear on the star appraisal stone. We said that we would leave the school in a natural manner, but you receiving grade C would barely meet the qualifications. What about the trust from one failure to another failure? Chapter 27 Framed Examination. Is it C? No, that's not right. The radiance is still slowly spreading. The examiners were also puzzled. The other examinees had quickly finished their tests. However, this student's radiance was weak in the beginning, but then it started to slowly become stronger. It went from D to C, and it was still growing stronger even after reaching grade C. B. This is definitely B. Holy cow, a comeback. The failure is doing a comeback. That must be a mistake. I only received a B. How could this guy possibly get a B? The other fire element user, Huang Feifeng, almost cried. Joman received an A, and that puny little kid called Da Niu also received a B out of the 4 fire elemental students. Only he, Huang Feifeng, had received a C. How was he going to receive Mrs. Tong Yu's affections now? Shui Musheng's eyes immediately began to brighten. As the homeroom teacher, his biggest fear was for someone in his class dragging down the average. Today, all Shui Musheng asked out of Mo Fan was for him to not be publicly expelled. It hadn't happened for the past 3 years. If this great Buddha didn't do that, then he could drag down the average as much as he wanted. What Shui Musheng never thought of was that this kid would suddenly emerge with a B. The average of the class was roughly B-. The great Buddha had unexpectedly increased the average grade, something he could not even dream about. The current Shui Misheng was happier than seeing an A-grade student. The discussion volume this time wasn't any lower than the chatter about Mu Bai before. After all, Mu Bai was the person who everyone knew had good grades, whereas Mo Fan was the well-known drag out of the dregs. The dregs suddenly seized AB. There were too many people who didn't expect this outcome. How is this possible? How is this possible? Mu Bai was flabbergasted. His uncle, Mu He, watched this scene while feeling completely speechless. What kind of situation is this? That kid got a B? Mu Bai, did you really place the black stone there? The absorption rate of that black stone is really strong. A person who can receive a C would be turned into someone who can't even get D, Mu He whispered to Mu Bai. I did place it. I definitely placed it there. Even if Mu Bai made a mistake on his examination, there's no way he would make a mistake on that part. The black stone was definitely placed there, but how did this guy get a B? Wasn't this guy drifting between C and D? Don't tell me that he was concealing his strength and then let it all out on the last examination to reach a B. C is a passing grade, whereas B would be quite good. Who could imagine that a failure who was supposed to take the penalty that hadn't been given for 3 years would suddenly turn into a good student? This grade was well within expectations. Mu Joyan's tone was indifferent as it carried a sense of mocking. His own daughter was almost taken away by this kid? If this really happened, then he would have been ridiculed by all of the people under the heavens. Alright, let's move on to the next class. Mu Joyan didn't want his daughter to pay too much attention to this kid, thus, he said this to the crowd of people. Big brother, this Mu Bai. Mu He wanted to continue talking. Mu He was not satisfied with this outcome. Today's plan was to let Mu Bai show off his skills in front of the clan and receive the attention of the family head. The other one was to let Mo Fan suffer a tragic end. However, the two outcomes hadn't been attained. How could he just let them leave like that? Oh, distribute a bit more to their family during the new year to show encouragement, Mu Joyan replied. As Mu Bai heard this, he was completely stunned. What the hell was, distribute some more to them during New Year's? Who the hell wanted that charity-like money? What he wanted was attention. What he wanted was for the Mu family to focus on supporting him. What he wanted was the Stardust magic tool. What he wanted was the colossal cultivation resources which the Mu family distributed to their direct descendant. This, big brother, I think. As Mu He was about to say a few words for Mu Bai, another voice suddenly resounded. That's wrong. This radiance is wrong. Suddenly, someone objected. It was a woman's voice, sounding soft and sexy. Mrs. Tang Yue, what objections do you have regarding our decision? According to the norm, the results of the exams are decided by the examiners. Even if we wanted to object. Shui Misheng started saying. Shui Misheng was actually extremely satisfied with this grade. He even suspected the star appraisal stone to have some malfunction. How could Mo Fan otherwise receive a B? Mrs. Tang Yue, please let this matter go. If there really is a problem, then I reckon I as the homeroom teacher will be unable to preserve my integrity. Teachers have no qualifications to object to the assessment of the examiners. However, they can object to accidents happening during the examination. We can even examine the testing equipment to ensure the accuracy of the equipment, Mrs. Tang Yue said. At this time, a school director was secretly shaking his head toward Mrs. Tang Yue. At the same time, the principal was also incessantly hinting to Mrs. Tang Yue. It's not that the school director didn't know there was some concealed trick beneath this, but they didn't want any unnecessary matter to arise when there were so many school directors present. What was the problem with the result? Wasn't it normal? It was a grade a common student should receive. Why do you have an objection regarding this result, honorable teacher? Mu Joyan became somewhat interested in this, so he began to inquire. Mrs. Tang Yue had already walked onto the examination ground. Her eyebrows were knitted. Suddenly she closed her eyes. She looked like a magician who was about to cast magic. The people who had some understanding about magic knew that she was actually just expanding her senses into the stone. Mrs. Tang Yu's action immediately caused Mu Bai and Mu He to panic. According to the norm, after Mo Fan had finished his exams, the examinations would take a break so the students could rest. At the same time, they would announce the most outstanding student's name of the first half of the examinations. Taking advantage of the break, the bald examiner would remove the dark stone without suspicion. This way, everything would be normal. The plan was flawless. Everything was going smoothly, But who would have thought that there would be a teacher popping out from nowhere who discovered the source of the problem? Mrs. Tang Yue, how can you just ignore the rules of the examination grounds? If I was you, then I would immediately leave the examinee's examination grounds. Mew, he immediately yelled out. Mew, he obviously had to be loud. He had to use his authority to intimidate this teacher who discovered the problem. However, Mrs. Tang Yue wasn't afraid at all. She looked as if she found something as she directly walked toward the star appraisal stone. The star appraisal stone has a problem. This examination has to be redone. Mrs. Tang Yue's incomparably sharp gaze stared at the examiner. The bald examiner was at a loss on what to do. He hastily looked at Mew He. Mew He was embarrassed. His expression appeared to be confused. What are you shocked about? Go over there and take a look. We must give the examinees an impartial examination environment. If there's a problem, then we must immediately go and fix it, the principal said righteously. The 3 examiners immediately went over to inspect, and they also quickly discovered the hidden dark stone. That's weird. We've already inspected this before. How could something like this pop up from nowhere? Another examiner said in astonishment. Whenever a student's examination was over, they would inspect it again. When Mew Bai had finished, the person who had gone over to examine the stone was precisely the bald examiner. This time, the bald examiner was really scared. Covering up for someone framing others on the examination, that was a big crime.